Hi Year 9 and welcome to your first lesson of a new topic which is called the living world. So your title for this lesson is What is an ecosystem? And your learning objectives are to define an ecosystem, define a range of geographical terms and investigate the interrelationships within a natural system. So just take a minute, pause the video, write the title, write the date down and then just press play when you've done that. Okay, so what do all these pictures have in common? You don't need to write anything down for this, but I want you to think to yourself about that question. So they are all ecosystems in the UK. They're all on completely different scales. In the bottom right-hand corner, we've got a pond. It looks like it could be a pond in somebody's garden, so quite a small scale ecosystem, compared to the picture in the top right, so a moorland landscape. So that's actually a picture taken in the Scottish Uplands in the northwest of Scotland. In the bottom left-hand corner, we've got a coastline on the east coast of Wales, and in the top corner, a picture of a forest in Yorkshire. So 4 different ecosystems in the UK. There's many more. Right, so this map here is showing habitats in the UK, fairly large ecosystems. So as I said before, we've got mountains and moorlands, predominantly in the northwest of Scotland, but elsewhere around the UK as well, so the areas in purple. We've got grasslands, enclosed farmland. So where we are in Baldock and the surrounding area of Baldock, we've got a lot of enclosed farmland, woodlands and coastal margins around the UK as well. So they're all fairly large scale ecosystems in terms of the UK, but we can also have really, really small ecosystems as well. So we looked before at the pond in somebody's garden, but even just an ecosystem around a corner of your garden, for example, very, very small scale ecosystems. They don't have to be major habitats. Okay, so this is an example of a lowland river ecosystem in the UK. So the middle to lower course of a river. If you think back to your rivers topic from either year 7 or 8, the middle to lower course, the landscape is relatively flat around the river usually. So what can you see in this picture? What could be in the grass? What could be in the water? I want you to take a minute to think about those questions around that picture. There's things that we can see, but there's also things that we can infer to be there. For example, we'd expect there to be possibly some, well, there definitely would be some species of fish in the river. Usually some frogs, for example, tadpoles, frog spawn. And what could be in the grass? So think about the types of animals that might be in that particular landscape. For a little bit more of a stretch, what are the living and non-living components of this ecosystem? So slightly more difficult. The living components might be slightly easier, but what are the non-living components of that particular ecosystem? So take a minute to think to yourself, pause the video, then press play again once you've done that. Okay, so we need to build up towards a definition of an ecosystem. So ecosystems have biotic and abiotic components. Biotic, you can think about biology, so something that's living, something that can reproduce. So plants and animals can reproduce. Abiotic, on the other hand, are things that are non-living and have never been living, and things that just cannot reproduce. So water, for example, and the sun in these examples here underneath. What I want you to do is to create 2 lists in your book using the components in the green boxes. Can you categorise those into biotic and abiotic? So 2 lists. You will need to write out biotic and abiotic and then just write the other terms underneath. Pause the video here and just press play again once you've done that. And here are the answers. Check you've got them right, correct your work if not, Pause the video, press play again when you've done that. Right, so we are now going to create a definition for what an ecosystem is. You have a sentence starter at the top. An ecosystem is, I want you to use the words and phrases in blue and develop those into a sentence to create your definition. You also have the answers from the previous question underneath. If you're looking for a little bit more of a stretch, can you also include the words and phrases in just the words in gold as well? Pause the video here, press play when you've done that. Okay, so we have done the first part of the lesson and defined what an ecosystem is. So now we are going to move on to have a look at a range of geographical terms connected with this topic. Biotic components, so the living features of an ecosystem, the plants and animals, the flora and fauna. And abiotic components, the non-living features, such as climate, sunshine, temperature, the soils in the particular area, and the rock underneath, the underlying bedrock. Producers, so the plants and vegetation that photosynthesize and create glucose to then be passed along the food chain. So trees, grasses, for example. And consumers, so consumers eat either the producers or other consumers. We've got primary consumers that eat the producers, secondary consumers further along the food chain, and tertiary consumers as well. We can also get quaternary consumers depending on the length of the food chain in that particular ecosystem. And decomposers such as fungi, bacteria, earthworms, slugs and snails. So there's components of an ecosystem that break down organic matter. So dead animals, dead plants, leaf litter on a forest floor, for example, get broken down by decomposers and the nutrients are transferred into the soil for the cycle to begin again, for those nutrients to be uptaken. And that is pretty much what the nutrient cycle is. So the transfer of nutrients along the food chain, broken down by the decomposers when plants and animals die, and then those nutrients are taken up again by plants for the cycle to begin again. Okay, and these are the geographical terms that you need to create a definition for. We need to start to create a glossary for this topic. Okay, so creating a glossary. Normally we'd give you one in school, but we need to, you need to create one either in the back of your book or on a separate piece of paper. You will be adding to this glossary progressively throughout this topic. So today we'll start with the key terms that you just saw in bold in the paragraph on the screen just before. As we started off this glossary for you, so producer, we've got the definition of a producer. You can see the definition of a producer in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. What I want you to do now, using the information here, using what I've just spoken about, is to add the terms in blue bold, to your glossary. So you'll need to either draw the table out, or if you want to write your glossary in a list, if you can do that without drawing a table, that's fine. Create a definition for each term in blue. If you want a little bit more of a stretch, can you also include the terms in orange? And then have a think about the question, the last line of writing on the screen here. So how do humans impact upon ecosystems? So lots of different ways. We have variable impacts in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. Countries of different levels of development sometimes can impact upon ecosystems in slightly different ways as well. So how many ways can you think of? Okay, so we have defined a range of geographical terms. So let's move on to begin to investigate the interrelationships within natural systems. So here we have an example of a food chain in an area of deciduous woodland in the UK. There's lots of different food chains in deciduous woodlands, but this is just one of them. So it begins with grass as the producer. So the grass gets eaten by a grasshopper and various other insects, various other animals as well. They get eaten by a secondary consumer, here in this case a bluebird, which gets eaten by a snake, generally an adder in deciduous woodland, which gets eaten by an apex predator. So the owl is eating the snake. The red arrows move in the direction of the transfer of energy. So the energy is being transferred ultimately from the producer to the apex predator. The decomposers are breaking down the organic matter and transferring it along the food chain again. The trophic pyramid in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, the reason it's a pyramid or a triangle is because there is more biomass in the bottom levels. So as energy is transferred along the food chain, energy is also lost in various different ways. So ultimately, the biomass, if you gathered together all the tertiary consumers, the biomass, the weight of those would be less than the weight of the primary producers. Okay, so a food web, so much more complex than a food chain, similar in the sense that the arrows are still moving in the direction of energy. So the arrows are moving from the producers towards the consumers. Primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. Obviously, the arrows can move directly from the producer to the apex predator, to the tertiary consumer, or they could just go in stages. So some animals are obviously omnivores, some animals are just herbivores. So there's lots and lots of interrelationships within a food web. Right, so your main task for today. All of these biota, all of these plants and animals on the screen here, are components of an ecosystem in the middle to lower course of a UK river. This is actually the ecosystem in the River Otter in Devon. So what I want you to do is to create a food chain using these components on the screen here. You must include the sun, a producer, a consumer, and a decomposer. There's a few different ways you can go about that. There's not just going to be one correct answer for this, but first of all, create a food chain. Once you've done that, and if you're looking for a little bit more of a stretch, can you then turn your food chain into a food web using all of the components on the screen? Pause the video here whilst you do that, and then just press play. Okay, so an example that you might have had. So the food chain here, obviously beginning with energy from the sun, the primary producer grass, which gets eaten by a grasshopper, grasshoppers get eaten by shrews, and then finally the owl eats the shrew. The arrows moving in the direction of energy flow. So we have investigated some of the interrelationships within natural systems. We've looked at food chains and food webs. Okay, so just to end the lesson, can you just write a few words down for each of these questions? So head, something that has made you think. Heart, something that you have felt. And bag, something that you will remember and take away from today's lesson. It can be anything at all. If anyone is looking for an extension activity, there's a really nice activity in Satchel 1 that your teacher will have added to that. It's a investigation into the River Otter in Devon, having a look at what happens when beavers are reintroduced back into the ecosystem after they have been missing for centuries in some cases. So really nice activity to do if you want to have a go at that. Next lesson, we will have a look at biomes, so global scale ecosystems.